Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to finally give my first couple impressions of Nilah and let you guys know where I think our newest champion sort of sits in with regards to balance, with design, just generally what I think about this champion. Now, my first impression is that she is generally fine. I don't have any particular strong feelings about Nilah one way or the other, but given that Nilah is a melee bot laner, right, basically a melee AD carry, and also given that Nilah had a bunch of passes that made her very scary for a lot of people, myself included, I think that this is ultimately probably a good thing for her to be considered this. But let me go ahead and talk through my first couple of thoughts on Nilah, given that I've had some time to play her over the weekend. I think that the best thing about Nilah is that her extra bonus stats and passives don't feel overbearing in the slightest. A lot of people were worried about her extra XP passive in particular, but also her extra armor penetration that she gets by existing, the extra healing she gets by existing, her passive amplifying heals and shields and giving her heals and shields, and if she gets healed or shielded, she also gives the person who healed or shielded her heals and shields. Right, there's a lot of that going around, and it really feels like Nilah has a ton of things that she just passively gets that make her better than other characters. But functionally, they never felt like they were too much for anyone to handle. I was able to maintain level with the enemy bot laners rather than be excessively over-leveled. The extra armor penetration I feel is probably warranted given that Nilah has to brawl on the front lines with enemy tanks that have built a lot of armor. And it generally feels like Nilah needs the extra healing from not only her Q but also from her passive because she is a melee champion in the bot lane. She's going to get harassed down, she's going to take a ton of damage just by existing in a bot lane that is typically dominated by two ranged champions, and therefore it feels pretty much fair that she has these abilities. I didn't feel like they were very overbearing at all, and in fact, I would argue that if she didn't have these passives, Nilah would be unplayable. She would get harassed out of lane, she would only tickle tanks that would then proceed to kill her because she had to get in melee range and doesn't have the advantage of range to keep them at arm's length and get extra damage in before that they actually come to grips with her. There's a lot about Nilah that I feel like is necessary, and a lot of these extra bonus passives and stats that she has are probably a requirement. It also means that Nilah, who already has a bit more of a power curve in line with that of traditional AD carries, doesn't have to play a very all-in, aggressive-oriented playstyle as a melee character in the bot lane. I'm sure we've all seen situations like a Yasuo with an Alistar or a Pantheon with a Leona in the bot lane, and all they do is look to kill you from level 2 onwards. And Nilah can do that as a melee champion. I think if you play her with an engaged support, she does have the option of saying, I'm a melee champion, you're a ranged champion, if I close the gap, I'm going to get to basically beat you with my better stats. But I think that it's a lot more fair then that Nilah can say, I don't have to do that. I can sit back, I can farm, I can wait to get my items, and I'm going to be a very scary DPS threat in the later stages of the game once I'm able to do that. I think that's a really cool thing that Nilah does, and I'm really happy to see that sort of design is played up with generally what Riot did with her. I think that tying her to crit and saying, hey, you are all about the auto attack, you're going to be all about attack speed, there's a lot about your kit that's just going to funnel you into that kind of build path that we want our marksman building, is a really good way for them to say, cool, so you're a bot lane melee character, but you're not overbearing, and you have generally the same kind of power curve, which I think is really, really nice. She feels a little like Samira in that regard, but I just kind of like how Nilah is able to play sort of a couple of different play styles and not be required to play that aggressively. I really like Nilah's ability to farm it out, in particular due to her interactions with her Q. I really like how Q is able to give you the boosted auto attacks, and then as it comes off cooldown is like just about when Nilah's boosted auto attacks are wearing off. So as long as you have Q off cooldown, you can just basically just keep alternating between those two. Q's a fairly affordable ability as well, so you can afford to use it in lane to not only last it safely from afar, but also then to get your boosted range auto attacks to last it safely from afar. There's just a lot of really nice interactions with Nilah's Q into auto attacking that I quite like, which is nice given that Nilah's other buttons are a little bit more situational. I do like Jubilant Veil. I think it's a good, maybe slightly different take on Jack's Counter-Strike, but generally speaking, I feel like it does enough of its own thing to warrant being taken. Slipstream is kind of fun because you can target allies with it. You can do things like dash to an enemy champion or minion, whack them a couple of times, then dash back to safety to another ally, minion or champion, right? There's a lot of kind of fun things that Nilah gets to do. I think Nilah's R feels very strong. I wasn't that high on the ability when I first saw it, but the damage and displacement is quite strong, and the biggest thing is it lines up enemies to then be hit with Nilah's AoE auto attacks for tons of damage in the middle of a team fight, and it also means that then Nilah feels like she's making an entrance when she finally does commit to a fight. Marksmen don't get that level of splashiness because they have the advantage of range. Nilah, though, gets to say, nah, I get to make a big entrance when I come in, basically pull everyone together, and then just start hitting it with my whip for a bunch of damage. There's a lot I really like about Nilah. That said, though, there are some things that I'm not a big fan about Nilah. I think the biggest thing is her animations are just a little bit longer than I would have liked, in particular on the W and the E. W has like a very small cast time, which makes it feel less fluid than I would have liked, and her E is a little clunky. It's fairly short range, and this makes the extra quarter second for the cast animation feel even worse. This is in comparison to something like Samira's E, which feels really nice to use, even though that's still a fairly short range dash. Nilah E, by comparison, just does not feel as fluid as I otherwise would have liked it. Last hitting can also be a difficult prospect on Nilah. I've touched on how she's a melee champion in a ranged champion-dominated lane. Her base auto-attack range is extremely low, which means that she needs to use her Q and her Q-boosted auto-attacks to last hit with, but all of those are AoE, which means that she pushes quite a bit while just trying to farm, and it makes her more vulnerable to then being zoned out if she gets the wave under the enemy tower. It does mean that she's able to shove back out if the enemy team shoves her under tower, but there are some disadvantages to having to do that, especially using your mana on Q, for example, where you'd rather try to save that and pace yourself throughout the lane. As with all marksmen, Nilah is also pretty team dependent. Her ability to set up plays for herself is pretty restrictive, and it's made even worse by the fact that she's melee and therefore can't even really poke like other marksmen can. All Nilah can do is stand around and wait for her team to set her up with some kind of play. If your team doesn't have any engage, Nilah's just going to stand there saying, well, I have this really cool ultimate that I'd love to pull the trigger on, but I'm never going to be able to actually do that because of the fact that my team can't give me the option to go in. Even with 2 dashes, the fact that it's targeted and the fact that it's just such a short range dash means that she doesn't really have the option of dashing to an enemy champion and then dashing again and then pressing R and doing her big playmaking potential. It's just not there, especially not with how squishy she is. I think part of the issue as well that I have with Nilah is that she doesn't have another home. She's weak early game, so in top lane she not only lacks the stats necessary to fight the beefy boys that play up there, but she also lacks the range advantage that other marksmen have, right? A Vayne top lane is played there because Vayne has range, and most top laners are melee and don't have range, so Vayne has an advantage. Nilah could go top lane but doesn't have range, and therefore these melee champions will be able to run her down with ease. Her being melee and weak early means that she'll get pushed in mid lane, and she lacks the amount of kill threat that assassins that play mid lane have. Jungle Nilah, I don't know how you would play that. I don't know how she ganks. She doesn't have the hyperscaling like Master Yi, so the question would be why you would do that. And her passive becomes entirely useless without a duo. Sure, she has more than one passive, you could argue, but her bonus healing and shielding isn't enough to carry that ability slot on its own. All this said, I haven't tried her in a solo lane, so if you guys have, let me know how it went down in the comments. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, but at least on paper, I can't see how this character would do in a solo lane. I also feel like the biggest problem I have with Nilah is that she fundamentally doesn't break the game. She's an option in the bot lane, sure, but picking Nilah as your bot lane carry deprives you of a ranged marksman, which is a pretty big ask, because range is important for zoning, range is important for better target access, range is important for poking down a tower's health bar while your team is sieging and the enemy team are defending. There are some difficulties with Nilah not being ranged that means that, sure, you can play a melee champion bot lane, but you're giving up quite a bit to do it. I think that if you are picking another ranged DPS champion in a separate lane, something like Corki mid or Kale top, it's probably okay. But if not, you're really hoping for a wombo combo team composition to come together around Nilah for her to work. That's where she's going to play very well. But even then, I feel like there are 80 carries that do that job better. Something like an Ezreal firing a True Shot Barrage through a wombo combo might do more than Nilah trying to run into range to press R on her kit, right? I just don't see how that's necessarily going to work. Ultimately, I think Nilah is really well designed and interesting, but I don't think she's interesting enough, and I don't think she's engaging. There are other champions that I've played before that I didn't really pick up. I don't really play them that much, but I still enjoy busting them out on occasion, or I play them a little bit more because I just want to learn them better. Bel'Veth, despite being horrendously designed, I played following my review because I actually wanted to experiment a little bit more with the champion and get to know the champion a little bit more. Even though I think she's still poorly designed, she at least captured me in a certain way that Nilah has failed to do so. I appreciate her from a design perspective. I think she does melee AD carry really, really well without being totally broken, but that doesn't make her interesting. I think there's also a bit of a lack of thematic resonance. She has the whip fighter thing kind of down. She has Aquamancer not really down at all, but it's present. She has this thing about fighting giant monsters, but there's nothing in her kit that specifically says you're good against tanks. She gets a bunch of armor penetration for free, but that's not really the same that I would equate with something like a Kog'Maw who does % max health damage. So I just feel like she doesn't have anything that makes her particularly stand out. She's just like the melee bot laner that isn't Yasuo. And I feel like Yasuo at least has way more thematic resonance and fun to play elements to his kit. This all likely just means that she's not my kind of character, but I am curious if any of you guys feel the same way. I'd love for you guys to let me know down in the comment section below if you've been really digging Nilah, and what is it about her that makes you like her that much. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. You'll also have to let me know how you've been building her, how you've been playing her, all that stuff down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.